It was almost eerie, the calm in Candace Owens' voice. Not a tremor, not a spike. She didn't shout, didn't spit fire, but every word she spoke landed with the sharpness of a surgeon's blade. You know what's telling? She asked softly. When a husband posts a birthday photo of his wife and she looks 10 years older, marriages don't collapse when love dies, he said. 2 calendar entries. One glowing, one irate. And when Candace was invited to the forum, she didn't ask for a run-up show or prepared talking points. The flames had jumped to the words. Words wrapped in velvet but edged with steel. On NPR a week later, Michelle made what sounded at first like a throwaway comment. Are we watching the death of a political marriage? He asked. Or are we embalming a political partnership, propping it up so the brand doesn't lose value? The full recording was played without interruption, and the verdict was unspoken but unmistakable. Something had shifted. Not in tabloids, not in gossip columns, but in tone, in tempo, in the choreography of a partnership that once captivated the world. Now, it was unraveling one photo, one quote, one subtle pause at a time. He looked dead into the camera. Are we celebrating love, or just managing stock in the Obama name? I'm glad I didn't have a son, she told the host with a casual smile. The host laughed, because the idea of raising another Barack. Well, that would have been a lot. But something hung in the air. Michelle didn't retract, didn't clarify. She let it sit there like smoke hovering over the ashes of a burned-down house. She responded with just 3 lines. I don't show up for pageants. I don't argue for applause. I speak when silence serves the powerful. That's not an accident, Candace said later on her own platform. That's brand separation in real time. They're splitting the narratives, not the name. Even the American Family Institute, not exactly known for jumping on media chatter, I found the controversy serious enough to call an emergency session. The official subject, modern marriages and political life, but everyone knew who the centerpiece was. They collapsed when one person stopped seeing the other as significant. He let that line breathe. Then he added, that picture wasn't a celebration. It was a signal. There were scholars, political thinkers, policy advisors, and it might be stayed there, fodder for think pieces. If not for 2 additional details that flipped the script. A woman who built her career on his name, now pulling herself out of the frame. She's talking about regret and withholding the repeat. It was classic Obama voice. To the love of my life. The Hillsdale audience wasn't TikTok fans or suburban girls. They didn't gasp, they nodded, they recognized the nuance. When a woman says she's relieved not to raise a second version of a husband, Candace went on, she is not talking about parenting. First, the caption. Candace leaned in. I've worked with photographers. You light up every room you walk into. And you look good doing it. Legacy media tried dismissing the picture as a spontaneous moment, but insiders from the White House photo corps were less forgiving. Tucker pounced. Really? He scoffed. But he looks like he's about to launch a Senate campaign. That's not affection. That's optics. This wasn't satire. Not a meme. He stood in the foreground, posture commanding, smile curated to near mathematical symmetry, immersed in golden light that kissed every feature. The photo went public the same day Michelle's new podcast release was quietly postponed with no reason given. Michelle stood beside him, technically, but Reese's, tired-looking, face shadowed, hair caught in an angle that did her no favors. But it wasn't about the picture anymore. The shot pulled attention to him, not them, and certainly not her. You don't green light. That kind of framing unless you want to send a message without needing the words. At a policy panel in Georgia, as Candace made the point, an older woman seated near the back piped up just loud enough for the audience to catch. She looks like she climbed out of rubble. Laughter rippled. Candace didn't flinch. No ma'am, she replied. She didn't crawl out. She got left in it. One, speaking anonymously to a Capitol reporter, dropped a small bombshell that wasn't cleared. That photo came from Barack's phone. No comms team, no vetting. That night on Fox, Tucker Carlson didn't need dramatic flow. Then came the second twist. Timing. When reporters asked if Michelle would attend or comment, her team issued a single-sentence reply. She'll speak when and how she chooses. The photo had gone viral. Sure, this isn't a playful jab, Candace noted during a panel at Hillsdale College 2 days after. This is a public unraveling. Tucker Carlson, not one to let a moment like that slide, escalated further. The NPR segment, clipped and circulated across major networks, found its way into an early hearing session at the American Family Institute. No edits, no bet, just the sentence hanging in the air like an unfastened rope. The Institute didn't call a vote. It didn't need to. Within a single day, it escalated the matter. Not to a panel or dialogue, but to a formal adversarial session. This wouldn't be a town hall. It wouldn't be a moderated discussion. It was to be a face-to-face confrontation. Michelle Obama versus Candace Owens, with cameras rolling and no red lines. This is not a debate, the lead moderator clarified. This is an unfiltered reckoning, just the cold feedback of a mic and the dry delivery of the moderator. This is not an inquisition into private matters, he said. It is a confrontation between public expectation and personal accountability. To women, to microphones, no applause, no interruptions. Just record. Tucker Carlson, seated at the auxiliary bench, was allowed one designated inquiry. I speak when I feel compelled, and people choose to listen. It held truth sharp, uncomfortable, and undeniable. Candace leaned forward slightly, almost casually. Or perhaps, she countered, your silences are part of the script. The pauses, the scarcity, the exits timed to perfection, all of it more persuasive than any monologue. Mrs. Obama, he began, voice slow and deliberate. Why is it that even with a quieter presence, you overshadow your husband's legacy in almost every modern cultural space? 2 chairs spaced evenly under the insignia of the American Family Institute. A seal etched with the phrase, virtues in exemplis, Latin for virtue through example. Everyone in the room knew exactly what that meant. For the first time in its institutional history, the invitation outlined its terms with total clarity. No topic was off the table, no segment would be timed, and neither speaker would be allowed prepared remarks or editorial buffers. Her voice cut cleanly through the stale courtroom air. I'm not here to perform an apology, she began. For over 10 years I've been carved into a reflection, a template that others stare into. But I never asked to be a reflection. I am not a mirror. I am a person. I am layered. I am flawed. What people call grace and strength. That comes at a cost no one ever bothers to count when the cameras fade. The venue was intentional. A decommissioned federal courtroom once used during ethics hearings against senators in the Reagan era. Every phrase Michelle delivered was being noted, dissected. Then the moderator turned to Michelle. You say you were pulled into the spotlight, she said. Yet every contract you've signed, books, media deals, speaking engagements, bears your name. Nobody else signed those for you. You describe yourself as reluctant, but a reluctant icon doesn't take $65 million to narrate their own legend. You've described yourself as an unwilling symbol, he said. But hasn't your post-White House visibility made you more symbolic, not less? Michelle took a breath, her face impassive. Yes, she answered, but not by choice. The machine needed a fix. Barrick stepped aside. I was dragged forward, not by ambition, by inertia. This isn't for entertainment, she said flatly. I'm doing this because someone has to say what millions only whisper. That line, once spoken, ignited conservative radio lines across the country. She said what we've all been thinking. One caller told Tucker Carlson on air. Not once did I ever think, good thing I didn't raise another version of my husband. That's not partnership. That's bitterness with a wedding band. Rules were tight. Both women would sit at opposite counsel desks, armed only with a microphone and a legal pad. The full session would be transcribed and archived in public record. Candace, during a press prep call, made her intent clear. Back in Washington, Michelle's team stayed pointedly silent, but insiders confirmed what was already rumored. She had pulled out of a planned keynote speech for the Women's Power Collective that same week. When pressed for a reason, a coordinator messaged a journalist off record she didn't want to justify herself in a room full of women who still believe in the institution of husbands. The conversation had moved well beyond Barack and Michelle. It had become a referendum on symbolism, and whether Michelle still qualified to carry the emblem she helped craft. There was no dramatic lighting, no sweeping music to signal gravitas. Michelle Obama, measured but unreadable, leaned in first. Across from her, Candace Owens said nothing. Her eyes were locked on a yellow legal pad, her pen moving without pause. That was the moment Candace clicked her pen closed. She looked up not with hostility, but with the kind of clarity that doesn't blink. Several attendees shifted in their chairs, but no reactions were allowed. The room remained bound by its oath of observation. Michelle's gaze sharpened, but her tone stayed even. I don't seek out attention, she replied. In that moment, the air didn't just hold tension. Michelle's tone cooled, but she didn't escalate. Her voice remained controlled. So now, she said quietly, silence is considered a form of deception. All silence protocols remain. This session will be preserved in full. The silence that followed wasn't ceremonial. It was the silence before impact, the kind that follows deliberate thought, not hesitation. Michelle didn't defer. She didn't pause to assess the optics. I live in a home stitched by prayers, not press releases. I don't monetize my covenant, I protect it. Tucker Carlson leaned in, measured but firm. Fatigue, he said, doesn't grant moral exemption, especially when it's been transformed into capital. Michelle turned slightly, not rattled. Funny, she said. No one asks your heroes if they're exhausted. Only women like me are expected to bleed and call the stains elegant. And when we say we're tired, suddenly we're threats. Michelle gave a slow nod. Not in concession, but recognition. It's about contempt. You didn't just say you were weary. I will not groom another man to carry symbols that failed me. Michelle's final words. I will not groom another man to carry symbols that failed me. still lingered in the chamber air when a female member of the committee, one previously vocal in defending unconventional motherhood roles, leaned gently into her microphone with a question. Not to challenge, but to probe. That sentence hit harder than any raised voice could have. It didn't echo. It settled, like a closing argument. For the first time, members of the tribunal shifted in their seats. Not from discomfort, but realization. Michelle had claimed the narrative. Candace, still composed, now appeared to be reacting. You said you were grateful you didn't raise a boy who might become your husband. That wasn't exhaustion. That was a veiled confession. There was a stillness. Not tension, but gravity. Michelle didn't recoil. She met Candace's stare directly. She'd anticipated the move. She shifted again. And yet here you are, she said, scrutinizing a union that survived for precedent, a racial reckoning, and the full weight of a media ecosystem trained to cannibalize political marriages. She leaned forward, palms planted lightly on the table, not for balance, but to establish ground. Mrs. Owens, she began, her tone composed, but edged with a kind of elegant venom. Only years in the spotlight can teach. Have you ever fought to defend your marriage? Not from infidelity, but from projection. With that, the structure melted. Civility gave way to confrontation. The microphones no longer symbolized diplomacy. They became weapons clean, sharp, and unyielding. What began as a carefully staged dialogue had shifted into something raw, something closer to a duel. Not over personal lives, but public images. Over influence, over cultural authority. Candace responded without pause. Not deception, she said. Observation. Because, unlike many in this room, I used to respect you. But respect without scrutiny becomes illusion. An illusion left unchecked becomes indoctrination. But if every morning you opened your phone to strangers rewriting your vows, would you still call it love? Or would you call it Candace looked up slowly. Not startled, not rattled, but deliberate. She didn't respond with words at first. She pushed her notes aside, folded her hands, and offered a silence of her own. Not avoidance, but preparation. The room was airless. The moderator jotted something on a notepad, glanced at the timer, then spoke into the mic. We now enter phase 2, he said. Unmoderated cross-examination. The air felt heavier, not out of reverence, but forewarning. She didn't linger for a reply. It was a rhetorical strike, not an inquiry. You judge from a distance, Michelle continued. I don't live behind velvet ropes, she finally said. She didn't blink. You question it, Michelle said. Because I've spoken aloud the cause of being this country's emotional placeholder, Candace responded. Not louder, but sharper. Her tone cut clean. This isn't about fatigue, she said. I will not apologize, she said, for refusing to pass unspoken burdens down to a child like an antique set of chains. And in hearings like these, optics crystallize before judgment. Verdicts begin in posture. Mrs. Obama, the committee member said evenly. ISNT, it's fair to suggest that your words have offered a vocabulary to women who've long been pressured into seeing motherhood as destiny. No one's mandating birth, she said calmly. But when motherhood is repackaged as misfortune or a narrative footnote, it becomes collateral in a culture that treats duty like a glitch. I'm not against choice. I'm against how its meaning is being twisted. Then she spoke calm but crystalline, her voice the kind that doesn't shout but still silences a room. Her previous command of the room now contended with a line that refused to die. I just couldn't imagine a miniature Barack. Candace reached forward and pressed a slim remote. A screen lit up at the end of the chamber. The moderator offered a nod. Permission granted. With the committee's approval, Candace said, I'd like to submit into the record the full transcript of Mrs. Obama's NPR interview from February 9, saying that in the presence of the man who stood beside you through campaigns, scandals, and victories, that isn't empowerment. That's betrayal, not of affection, but of allegiance. To the name that raised your platform and caught your public stumbles. Her words were quiet thunder. Michelle, for the first time, smiled. Small, unreadable. She had controlled the room, but the ground had shifted. Not by volume, by impact. Women who don't want their identity reduced to biology. Michelle responded immediately. A small nod, almost imperceptible, but her voice carried with unwavering clarity. Her voice, when it returned, was quieter, cooler. I didn't reject the idea of a son, she said carefully. I just couldn't picture raising another Baraka. I didn't want to imagine him twice. That pause after her words carried weight. Around the table, several committee members exchanged subtle glances. Not judgment, reflection. Yes, not all women seek or require motherhood to define their worth. And we must stop treating childbirth as the only route to legacy. Some with conviction, others more cautiously. Candace leaned into her mic, her fingers grazing its base like she was lining up a shot. Michelle's reply was faster now, as though it lived in her bloodstream. Motherhood isn't sacred by obligation. It's sacred when chosen, weighed, embraced, or even declined, without guilt or shame. Tucker Carlson, who had remained an observer until now, leaned forward, hands calmly folded. "That's fair," he said. "But when we turn motherhood into a burden and reduce fatherhood to a cultural afterthought, we're not just challenging the mold, we're gutting the foundation. You didn't have to raise a son, Mrs. Obama. But why go so far as to say you didn't want one?" Michelle blinked. For the first time in the exchange, she didn't rush to answer. Candace didn't leap in. She waited. The silence that followed wasn't passive, it was heavy. The screen displayed plain black text on a white slide. No frills, just the words. Candace read them slowly. "Not for performance. For clarity. I'm glad I didn't have a son. I didn't want to raise another If I did, I think I'd just feel sorry for him." No one interrupted. No one reacted. The sound of an older member folding her glasses was the only reply. A progressive lining committee woman dropped her gaze, quietly unsettled. Candace exhaled. Not to settle nerves, but to prepare the next strike. "For context," she said, "according to the U.S. Census Bureau, black children are more likely than any other demographic to live in father-absent homes. This isn't symbolic. It's systemic. And when Michelle Obama says I didn't want another Barack, it stops being a quote. It becomes a message." "No one asked Mrs. Obama to clone her husband," she said. The motion was small, but the tremor in her hand was not from heat. It was from precision meeting pressure. "I didn't think that line would be treated like a forensic deposition," she murmured, not directly into the mic, but loud enough for the panel to hear. "But when motherhood becomes a stage 2 critique fatherhood, that's not introspection. That's sabotage. And it matters, especially in communities where fatherhood is already an endangered role. I am here for the mother in Georgia explaining to her son why his father's missing. For the dad in Indiana working nights so his boy can finish school and wondering why the people his son admires never look like him." Michelle turned slightly, lifting a cloth to her forehead. Tucker's voice was measured now. "Even no one interrogated you, Mrs. Obama. You were quoted, and if a quote reveals more than intended, that's not persecution. That's transparency." Michelle looked like she might answer, but stopped. The optics of rushing to defend herself now would carry more weight than silence. The moderator tilted toward Candace, an invitation to proceed. She did. "I'm not here just for my voice," she said. There was no data dump. Candace had held back on numbers. Until now, the moderator straightened a sheaf of papers. The room shifted, subtly but undeniably. The energy that had once tilted toward Michelle's poetic pain now leaned toward Candace's cold exactness. This wasn't just a rhetorical pivot, it was a recalibration. The balance of the room had changed. Not with applause, but with posture. Then TuckerCarlson.com, as ever, cleared his throat and reached for a beige folder marked Joint Records 2023 to 2025. "For committee review," he said, handing it across. "This is a comprehensive breakdown of public appearances logged for both President and Mrs. Obama over the last 16 months. You'll notice a pattern," Tucker began, voice calm but laced with implication. "Not one documented joint appearance in any public-facing role." A clerk moved down the table, distributing the compiled records. "In our relationship, space is respected. Presence in the public eye should never be confused with intimacy behind closed doors." Candace leaned in, voice refined but edged like steel. "Space," she said, "is necessary. But when space extends to 478 days with no shared appearance, it stops being a relationship and starts resembling an engineered separation. One designed to preserve dual legacies, not a mutual one." Mrs. Obama said, "If we may pivot from scheduling to sentiment." Michelle nodded slightly, chin still lowered. Candace resumed, voice even and precise. "With the committee's permission, I'd like to present a clip from last year's Princeton University." A nod was given. The screen lit up. Michelle appeared, wearing a deep purple blouse, addressing a sea of graduates. The sound of shuffling pages replaced words, but the silence spoke louder than any argument. The only change came from a technician, who dimmed the podium lighting by 10%. "It outlines the former president's public appearances over the last 14 months. With your permission," she said, "I'd like to play footage from the former president's most recent birthday address." He spoke of strength and family, but when he said Michelle and I, his eyes dropped, not to a teleprompter, but to the floor. "Then allow me," he said, "to ask what many are already thinking." The clip ended in a hush. 27 keynote speeches, 12 international summits, 9 major Democratic fundraisers. Mrs. Obama was present for none of them. A senior councilwoman leaned forward, her voice low but direct. Candace didn't hesitate. "No," she replied. "It doesn't affect your humanity, but it does affect your position. For years, you've represented a model of unity, one you now seem unwilling to uphold. And that shift, Mrs. Obama, is not just intimate, it's ideological." "Mrs. Obama, we acknowledge personal privacy, but can you confirm or deny whether you and the former president are currently separated?" The silence returned, but this time it wasn't passive. It was the kind that holds the weight of unspoken truths. In that softened glow, Michelle sat partially obscured, a literal echo of the symbolic withdrawal now under scrutiny. The light remained dim as Candace inhaled silently, not to reset, but to imprint the moment. The visual was now undeniable, not only to those present but to millions watching the hearing unfold online. The illusion of unity had begun to unravel. When I walk the street in a hoodie and cap, nobody notices me. I'm just another black woman in America. I disappear. Yet your production house accepted a $60 million Netflix deal. Your memoir launched with international campaigns. If this is retreat, it's a retreat into empire. A committee member raised his hand, calmly. Mrs. Obama, he asked, isn't it fair to question whether your public discomfort with fame contrasts with the scale of your public influence? Candace paused the footage precisely after the word disappear. Madam Chair, she said, we are now discussing the architecture of visibility. Then she said, I don't claim to be free from contradiction. I live with intention, because the world itself is tense, especially for women who look like me. Candace responded, slowly now, her voice dropping just slightly. Mrs. Obama, we're not interrogating the world's contradictions. We're examining the moment you exit a collective identity, the moment the shared narrative no longer served your individual assent. The same woman who launched solo tours in 12 states and reached millions with her podcast says she prefers invisibility. But when the mic turns back, you re-emerge with lighting rigs and a narrative queued up. That's not retreat, that's orchestration. The session chair, who had remained silent until now, leaned into her mic. For the record, the committee acknowledges an emerging suggestion that perhaps the former First Lady has, intentionally or not, elevated personal mythology above collaborative responsibility. No one recognizes me. That's not humility. That's a signal unmet. 16 months, he continued, of individual calendars, separate engagements, distinct travel items. Mrs. Obama, he said carefully, if the name Obama no longer reflects a shared emotional identity, then in your public platform, what function does it serve? Michelle did not reach for her papers or water. Her tone remained firm. I carry the name because it belongs to the architecture of history. It's not about affection. It's about continuity. No shared events, no combined addresses, no anniversary acknowledgements, not even a co-signed holiday message. If this is togetherness, it's of a kind this country hasn't witnessed before. Michelle, poised but without a smile, interlaced her fingers and responded without flinching. Michelle said nothing, but the tightening of her jawline suggested calculation. The pause that followed wasn't one of reflection. It was the kind of pause politicians use to gauge fallout. Candace gestured to the screen behind them. A video played. Michelle on stage at a leadership summit 6 months earlier, when a name is kept not out of love, but out of function, she said. It becomes less a family name and more a relic. And when relics are paraded as identity, history becomes branding, not memory. The audience didn't react audibly, but toward the back, a retired legislator whispered to her colleague, we've moved past statements. This is now evidence, and its scalpel sharp. I am a free woman, she declared confidently. I carry my own legacy. I belong to no man. The word struck like a verdict, delivered before any defense. The moderator raised an eyebrow, then leaned into the mic. Candace didn't smirk. Her reply was clinical. Tucker leaned forward, his fingertip tapping softly on the wood. You know, she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. Tucker followed with a sharper tone. You've insisted you don't crave attention, Mrs. Obama. Michelle parted her lips. But for a moment, nothing came. She paused, then added, when the focus shifts to your husband, you fade into shadow. Michelle offered no rebuttal. Her hands rested motionless. Tucker tapped another folder. His eyes stayed down. This is file 3, he announced. Candace adjusted her mic once more. A faint murmuring rippled across the panel. Not outrage, but recognition. Michelle took a breath through her nose, deliberate and composed. I will not confirm. I will not deny. Because either answer does not determine my worth. Michelle held her composure. Her spine straightened, her eyes steady. But the energy had changed. Tucker leaned slightly forward. Do you believe, Tucker asked carefully, that the integrity of your image should be beyond questioning, especially when that image shapes national moral compass? Michelle responded with a subtle shake of her head. My integrity isn't for lease, and my image isn't on trial by public vote. But Candace wasn't done. She reached forward and cued a recent leaked clip to the projector. It was grainy, but distinct. We endure illnesses, Mrs. Obama. We cherish spouses. If the man beside you feels like something you survive, not someone you love, he's not your partner. He's a placeholder. One committee member muttered quietly, Jesus, just barely audible. Michelle, backstage at a leadership event, chuckled with a staffer before saying with tired candor, Barack's great at showing warmth, but living with him, it's like managing a long headache. The audio hung like fog, heavy and dense. Then, almost clinically, he added, a man reduced to background in his wife's spotlight is no longer a husband. He's an accessory. Then let me ask plainly, do you still stand behind the legacy your husband left behind, or has that too been quietly shelved? No gavall had to fall. The silence itself recessed the session. And it wasn't just emotional anymore, it was symbolic. The name Obama, he said, means more than a marriage to millions of black Americans. It represented a generational shift, A new language. If you don't carry it for your husband anymore, who do you carry it for? You call it a costume. I call it armor you survive. The public eye, however you must. Observers from both sides, those who once lionized the couple and those who always questioned the begun. But I no longer live within their illusion. That's not betrayal. That's clarity. If the love had died quietly, what else had survived only for show? Then let's stop dressing it up. You've kept the Obama name not for love but for leverage. You inhabit the shell while discarding the core. You parade the rind, but won't admit the fruit has rotted. And the American people were never told their admiration was being asked for a partnership in name only. Mrs. Obama, after everything you've said here today, do you still consider yourself part of the Obama household? His voice, calm and almost reflective, followed. Symbolism, Mrs. Obama, may carry power, but it cannot be nourished by self-preservation alone. Once a vibrant image of smiles and triumph, it now appeared dimmed, aged, slightly off. The faces still smiled, but Michelle stood slightly removed from the center, as if already outside the frame. Candace didn't flinch. Her words followed like steel through silk. The only part lit in full was Michelle herself, seated in half profile alone. I still respect what we made together, but even love Mr. Carlson. She paused. Has an expiration date. Tucker waited for the impact on her. For the first time, Michelle's eyes dropped. I loved him once, she said, voice low. That was my name before the White House. And it will be my name after this story closes. The entire room held still. Candace leaned in, tone low, but raised. Michelle's gaze was unwavering. I am Michelle LaVaughn Robinson. The chairman folded his hands, his expression unreadable, weighing more than words. Michelle answered without softness. I'm not curating the past, I'm navigating the future. Tucker leaned forward with the precision of a courtroom historian. Michelle adjusted her blazer lapel with calm deliberation. I carry it for those who still need something to hold on to. Candace didn't blink. Michelle released a tired breath that sounded almost like a chuckle. A long pause followed, broken only by the chairman's fingertips drumming the oak. At that moment, the camera panned and prompted to the family portrait mounted behind the witness table. The light in the chamber, possibly by accident or design, had dimmed just enough to cast a faint shadow across the lower edge. No one spoke, because by then, the silence had said everything.